You're in the chair. And Gene Roddenberry took all the social climate of the time and turned it into a show, kind of hidden in a way, right? Can you talk about what lessons you learned as an Asian American on that show?
Well, Gene was a philosopher, filmmaker, and he wanted to use science fiction. You know, he felt television in the 60s was being totally wasted because the 60s was a turbulent time in this country. The civil rights movement and all the turmoil going on, the sheriff turning attack dogs onto peacefully demonstrating people in the South. We had the Vietnam War going on, and that was dividing this country at home as well as, you know, this war being raged in far off Southeast Asia. And none of that was being reflected on television. The Cold War was coming to a head. Cuba, you know, was happening. And Gene felt that television should be not just entertainment, but a medium of communication, education, and enlightenment. And he thought and he came up with the idea of using science fiction as a metaphor, and by placing this society, American society, with all that fractured division going on in the country, in the future, and painting a utopian world, looking back at this, and using science fiction as a metaphor for these issues. And I was really inspired by this man. And he said, this was when I was being interviewed for the show, he said the Starship Enterprise is a metaphor for Starship Earth and the diversity of this starship. People from all different parts of this planet with different histories, different cultures, different faiths, all working together in concert. He wanted to show that, and you saw that visibly on the show by the casting. And you also heard that diversity, although it was not authentic to the time, but you heard a Scottish accent who represented Europe, and you heard a Russian accent which represented Russia. At that time, the Cold War seemed insurmountable. Nuclear armed powers mutually threatening each other with annihilation. And that too, in the 23rd century, would be overcome. So that utopian picture, looking to the future with optimism and a utopian society that we can aspire to.
When you go through this whole exhibition, is there a favorite single item? Like you can kind of...
You know, the internment story is the most important part, because that to me was what shaped me and formed me. And my mission in life has been to raise the awareness of that chapter of American history. You know, this is a Japanese-American story, but on an even larger basis, it's an American story. It was the United States Constitution that was egregiously violated, and so all Americans should know about this and learn the lesson from this chapter. The problem is they don't know. I'm always shocked, particularly east of the Rockies, people that I consider well-read, well-informed. When I tell them about my childhood imprisonment, they're aghast. They can't believe such a thing happened. And so it's been my mission to make people aware of this, that it happened, it can happen, and it did happen in this country. And in part, because our education system has been very derelict in incorporating this chapter. Yes, it's an embarrassing chapter, a shameful chapter. But the other part of that is, and it's a painfully understandable reason, the people that experienced the internment, the adults, didn't want to talk about it. And I talk to people, younger people, and they might be in their 40s and 50s, and they tell me, oh, my parents were in camp, or my grandparents were in camp, and I ask them, where were they? They said, I don't know. And so I give them some hints. Wyoming, Arkansas, Colorado, Arizona, they don't know. And I ask them, do you know the name of your parents' camp or grandparents' camp? They don't know. And they don't know because they didn't talk about it for painful reasons. I mean, it brought back awful memories. Many parents or grandparents didn't tell their children, their progenies, about their camp experience. And so we played a part in the silence on this chapter of American history. And so this institution is very important to us because it, if it's dependent only on people like us, the children, and others who, like I have many conversations with my father after dinner, if those people are the only ones left to talk about it, we're going to be gone. And we want the story to remain. So this institutionalizes that story. And we developed a musical to reach another audience on the biggest, we aimed for Broadway, and we got it there, the biggest stage in America, to tell that story to a larger audience.
I mean, I know that Allegiance, you had a seat for Donald Trump, right? Does he even know about it? Do you ever hear?
He knows about it. I sent him a letter, but I also talked about the invitation to Donald Trump and the morning talk shows, afternoon talk shows, both television and radio, and the evening talk shows, and the late night talk shows. So it's, he knows. And
that seat's going to stay empty, or do you think he's going to show up one day and surprise?
Well, we had that seat, an aisle seat with a great big poster board, and it's read, "This seat saved for Mr. Donald Trump." He was a candidate then, for the nomination, so Mr. Donald Trump. And we had a countdown on the number of performances he missed. But it was a good marketing device for us because during intermission, there'd be a line right beside that chair, and they would hunker down and take a picture of themselves with that Donald Trump reserved seat poster. And they would post it, and the people would know that Allegiance exists, and this guy saw it, and there's Donald Trump's absent seat there.
Do you really want him to show up?
Oh, of course I do. I want him, in part he didn't know, but now he knows that chapter of American history is there. And I want him to really feel it, what it was like. We humanize that story. And we heard sobs in the theater in those particular tear-jerking scenes. We were reaching people, and I'd like to think that Donald is reachable that way too. He's a human being. He acts crazy, and he lies a blue streak, but he's a human being, and I want him to understand what he's talking about and the kind of things that's going to happen with some of those executive orders or the health care that he's supporting. He lies. He says, I won't cut Medicare. I won't cut it. But that's precisely what is happening. He is a lying, let me be a little bit more circumspect, a mendacious president.
That's
now people will run to the dictionary.
Yeah, I was like, where's my phone? I had a few people's names. I was thinking if you could tell me if you got to talk to them today, what would you say to them? And I guess first one on my list was Arnold Schwarzenegger. If you saw him today, what would you say?
I would say he is a hypocrite because he believes in traditional marriage. And that's why he vetoed the marriage equality bill here in California in 2005. And at the same time, he was carrying on with his housekeeper. I mean, how can he do that? I would say to him, a marriage, traditional marriage, is two people who love each other, who commit to each other, and as the vow goes, in sickness or in health, through thick and thin. And when the situation gets thin, they will stick together and support each other all the way to the end. That is what a marriage, traditional marriage is. Not necessarily man and woman. Because, and I said the same thing to Donald Trump. I had lunch with Donald Trump. I tried to do a little proselytizing with him. And he said he believes in traditional marriage. That was his argument. And I had to rein myself in because he was going through his third marriage and his infidelities were highly publicized. And he has the cheek to talk about traditional marriage to me. By that time, I'd been together with Brad for a couple of decades, you know. But that's what I would say to Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, I guess the same kind of thing. What would you say to question? William Shatner. Gotta bring him up because I've read it. This is funny.
Bill Shatner knows. I mean, you know, Bill is someone who likes to have the attention of the media, particularly when he's coming out with a new accomplishment. His written books or his singing album or whatever. And he, for example, the big hoo-ha. When we got married, because Walter and Nichelle were members of our wedding party, we invited all the other cast members, the regular cast members. And we sent Bill an invitation too. And it's on record. Brad and I were doing a television interview for AP, and he asked, to whom did you send invitations? We said everybody, including Bill, despite the so-called tension between us, because it's a hoked up tension. And so we said we sent Bill an invitation too, and so and they all RSVP'd. Some people had to send their regrets, but we never heard from Bill, which is not unusual. People have invited him, to parties or dinners, and he never responds. So it wasn't unusual. We thought he's not coming. 2 months after the wedding, he goes on the media and complains about George not inviting him to our wedding. 2 months after. I mean, if he really wanted to come, and he railed on and made a big one interview after another, And we thought, if he wanted to come that bad, why didn't he call us before? And something might have happened in the mail, and the invitation didn't get to him. Why didn't he call us before? But to go to the media and complain about it 2 months later when nothing could be done about it. And then we happened to be driving down Sunset Boulevard, and there was a huge billboard advertising William Shatner's new talk show, Raw Nerves. And I said to Brad, that's why he made a fuss. He can put out a press release and he'll get very little coverage. But if he has a controversy, then it'll get played. And he discovered that gets a lot, I guess our so-called feud gets him a lot of press. So he's always hoked that up. But we see each other at Star Trek convention, and I go like this to Bill, and he'll go.
The last one in this series, what would you say to FDR in 1941, let's say? What would you say to him? You have an opportunity to talk to him. What would you say to him to prevent him from, an executive order?
Well,
what could you say?
This year, I was invited to speak at the Roosevelt Library at Hyde Park, Roosevelt's residence. And on that same day, we also screened Allegiance there. It was an eerie feeling, and I thought about that question. I would tell him that I respect him as both a president and as a human being. His overcoming his challenge, physical challenge, was an amazing thing, and that strong will and determination to overcome that is, I think, superhuman. And what he did as the president to pull us out of the Depression and all those social programs. I mean, at the risk of being called a communist and socialist and all the things that he had to go through. It took a lot of strength and political savvy to do that. The one thing that I personally will forever hold against him is what he did to the Constitution of the United States by that sweeping characterization of Japanese Americans as the enemy, and to put us in the most egregious violation of the United States Constitution. I would tell him that. But my father told me that our democracy is a people's democracy, and it was made by great men who did great things, who had large visions. And my father used George Washington and Thomas Jefferson as an example. They were the ones that helped establish this nation. They were the ones that articulated the shining ideals of this nation. But they are also fallible human beings. They kept other human beings as slaves. And I'm very mindful of that. And you are one of those people. You have both greatness and fallibility in you. And we were the victims of your fallibility. In a two-party system, we have people that are professional politicians, and the human fallibility in a lot of people, Democrat and Republican, shows at a time like this when there's such keen tension. Right now, because the Republicans have the power, they feel they can do what they can, and they're coming down with awful things. And we've got to resist. You know, dissent is not the enemy of democracy. In fact, real patriots fight for the right to dissent.